series, this episode specifically, we're going to be focusing on our parents' perspective. It's a conversation from parents who have been through the process and want to help you along the way by providing you some insights on how to get through it. And today we have two people with us that I am super excited to introduce. We're joined by Kelly Hostetler Garrett, class of 97, parent of classes 26 and 28, and Fitz Totten, parent of class 2029. And they're going to share their experiences today in supporting their students through this college search process. So first, we'll start with Kelly. Kelly is class of 97 along with her husband, James. They're both alum and proud parents of both current students. Kelly studied English and education while attending William and Mary and has had many roles in her career, including experience as a high school English teacher, instructional designer, technical writer, and currently coordinator for a PhD program at the School of Education at UVA. And Fitz Totten is a proud father of two children, one of whom will be attending William and Mary here in the fall as a member of the class of 2029. Fitz has committed his 30-year career to advocating for higher education. He's worked in admission offices of St. Lawrence University, Duke University School of Law, and Vanderbilt University. He had a 16-year career consulting as chief enrollment officers with EAB Royale before consulting on his own. So both Fitz and Kelly are eager to be here with us today. And without further ado, we're going to get the conversation started. Before we do so, though, I want to give you all just a heads up that we want you to be involved in this conversation with us. So as questions arise, feel free to ask them, and we will also include them into the list of prepared questions that we have for you today. All right, so we're going to start with our first question, and I'm going to start with you, Kelly. Tell us briefly about your experience navigating the college application process as a parent.
Sure. We had very different experiences. My oldest student thought that he wanted to go to a big university in an urban center, and he thought he wanted to go far away. He applied to about a dozen schools, visited a lot of places, and agonized over the decision. We started visiting after admissions, doing the admitted students days, and things just kind of started falling off his radar. And we went to the day for admitted students, and he realized that William and Mary was, in fact, the place for him in the end. So sorry, that is in the way. Um, so he went from a lot of choices down to just one, and felt like William and Mary was home for him. The youngest one, basically from the time he was 4 years old, said he wanted to go to William and Mary first because it was near With Candy Shop, which alumni parents will probably appreciate. But as he started to look more into it, he really liked the programs, the small environment. So he actually applied early decision. So it was a much more simple, cut and dry experience for him.
Okay. Okay, now I'm going to pass it on to you, Fitz. Can you tell us a bit more about your experience in navigating the college application process as a parent?
Sure. Well, for starters, I come at it from a very different vantage point, right? Kelly's a graduate, her husband's a graduate. She knew tons about the college heading into her two boys' college search processes. And by contrast, I'm not a William and Mary graduate. And, growing up in Virginia, of course, I've known plenty of people who've gone to William and Mary, but when my son and I started our college search, his college search, I would highlight that he jumped into the process thinking that he wanted to go to a very small liberal arts college.
Mhm.
And as the process unfolded, a variety of uh, experiences, let's call it,
Yeah.
took shape in such a way that he ended up pointing his attention to William and Mary, falling in love with it in an unexpected way. And I'm sure we're going to talk more about that as we progress. But he could not be more thrilled with the opportunity to go to school there in the coming year. So.
Yeah, I love that. Okay, so we're gonna go into our next question, and here is where we're gonna get to the nitty-gritty of it all. As parents, you understand that there's ups and downs that both come with the college application process. So we're gonna start with Fitz. What would you say was your saving grace when supporting your student through this process?
Well, I think that to begin, I would highlight one very practical, simple piece of advice that I've received a long time ago that when I used it in my own house, it helped a ton. And that was that, if you schedule time to talk to your teen about the college admissions process, it tends to go a lot better. If they have to walk around your house worried as they get out of the shower in the morning or as they come down for breakfast or come back from a sports practice, they worry. If they're worried that you're going to pepper them with college search questions at any minute of the day, then they inevitably become less receptive to those conversations. So, the piece of advice that I got that really saved me was being mindful of telling, and my daughter's in the process right now. So telling both of my children, hey, we're going to talk about the college search process. I'm making this up at, at 7 on
Mhm.
Tuesdays. So
Okay.
let's plan for that, carve
Mhm.
out that time so that they know it's coming. And if they know it's coming and you know it's coming, then everybody comes to that conversation more prepared and more receptive to different ideas. And as a consequence, the teens don't end up walking around the house on eggshells, worried about those questions from mom and dad. So that was a real saving grace. Um, the other piece is a little bit more conceptual, and that
Okay.
is that I needed to remind myself of what it was like to be a teenager, to remind myself of how an active and engaged mind for a teen is going to change. And so, a big part of how my son landed on falling in love with William and Mary is that during this college search process, he fell in love with linguistics. So he headed into the process knowing that he loved computer science, but not knowing much at all about linguistics. So as this process evolved and he discovered linguistics and he decided that that would be really important to his college search, we were flexible enough to allow that to come in. We were flexible enough to allow that change, that evolution of his thinking. And so a saving grace for me was not being so rigid with the college search process that we couldn't adapt to those new things that he discovered.
No, that's really great insight that you're providing here. Like, one, I've never heard anybody say that they took the time to schedule out the conversation in terms of the college application process, like we do so many other things in the day-to-day schedule. So I think that would be really helpful to parents to hear, like, okay, I can come to this conversation prepared. And it also starts to teach your student and your child that, okay, we can come to conversations prepared like we do in any other avenue of our life. Kelly, would you like to add anything? What was your saving grace when supporting your two boys?
Sure. One big kind of concept that we embraced early was there's not good colleges and bad colleges. I remember at some point when my student was a ninth grader, he said he had to go to a good college.
Yeah.
And that really bothered me. I think there's a college for every kid that wants to go to college. And so this concept of good colleges and bad colleges is just, it kind of starts off on the wrong foot.
Mhm.
So very early on, we started talking about you're going to find the right college. And,
Love that.
you can set those rankings and some of those preconceptions aside because we're going to look for the right college for you. Another thing that we were talking about, Fitz and Faith and I before, I asked my students what are some things that I should share. And they gave me two very different answers of what was important in the college application process. The older one talked about making connections at the university with professors and students, and the other one said write as few of essays as possible. And it was just very indicative of their two personalities. And Faith pointed out that kind of looking at that from a bigger picture, it's really about letting your students drive the process and make it more about what they want to do and how they want to approach it. So I think allowing your students to have that control, which is hard as parents to let that go, especially with teens who are preoccupied with activities and friends and things like that. But really allowing them to drive it will allow them to own it and feel more vested in the whole process as well.
Yeah, I agree. I'm happy you actually decided to share that story with us because I was going to touch on that and also Fitz's comment about really leaning into the flexibility and allowing your student to take the lead in it. This is one of, I can speak from experience here. This was one of the first experiences that I got to take the lead on something in my life. And so my parents kind of taking a seat back and allowing me to explore interests and what I like about colleges and what I don't like about them and be honest about that. And the process really helped. So I'm happy that both of you spoke to that as parents and being able to take a bit of a step back and allowing your students' interest to drive their college search. Okay, so now that we've talked about an overview and your saving grace, now we're going to kind of go back to the beginning of this process. How did you begin to introduce your students to the college application process? We'll start with you, Kelly.
We started probably absurdly early, but in the course of road trips and family visits and trips like that, we would just drive through campuses, maybe take a campus tour. I think we took our first campus tour when my oldest was in eighth grade, and it was Harvard, because we were in Boston, and Harvard is a historical university. And at that point, we weren't talking about where do you want to go to college. But what we did every time we visited is we would just have him write a pro and con list. These are the things that I think I like, and these are the things that I think I don't like. And in retrospect, that worked really well because some common themes emerged in what he liked about the campus atmosphere and whether he wanted to live on campus or not. And so some themes emerged out of that. So starting early, or even, whenever you start, I think less focus on is this the college for you, and a little bit more focus on what are some things that you like and don't like can help drive that process to kind of create a more clear picture of what it is that they're looking for.
Okay. Fitz, would you like to add on to this conversation here?
Sure. So again, demonstrating that there are lots of different ways to
Mhm.
tackle this process. I was very careful in pumping the brakes and waiting until the second half of sophomore year to start the college search process. I wanted to do whatever I could to try and get my son to acclimate to just being a high school student and making the successful transition into high school before I allowed these thoughts of college to, creep into his thinking. And as we began, what I did is I focused on trying to encourage him to recognize the differences between colleges. Okay, we like you, Kelly, we went casually to visit a few schools that were convenient on our family vacations. And, as we did that, I would say I live in Richmond, Virginia. How does this feel different from the University of Richmond? How does this feel different from VCU, these schools that are in my kids' backyards? And so, we focused on those differences first and then used that as, let's call it, a foundation for then subsequently identifying the things that he liked. And it was really clear and obvious pretty quickly that he was gravitating towards the liberal arts colleges. So it didn't take long, but focusing on those differences at the beginning definitely helped
I
because
love
he
that you
he
all.
just didn't know much about college, right? He
Mhm.
he
Yeah.
entered into the process, even though I'd worked in this
Mhm.
space my whole career. He was just a teenager, didn't know much about college and really what it entailed.
Mhm.
Wait, can I
Okay,
add
so I
something to
love.
that?
Oh, go ahead.
So, kind of to build on that a little bit, one thing we were careful about from the very beginning is not
Mhm.
talking about building your college application.
Mm.
They get so much feedback from the media and their teachers and their peers about you've got to do this for your college application. We tried to be very clear from the beginning that we wanted them to look for opportunities to build themselves and explore their own interest and their potential careers and opportunities like that. And they weren't doing it for the college application, which among all of us, we probably know that that was certainly part of what they were doing. But we felt like it was really helpful for them to couch those experiences in you're doing it to grow and learn because it just made it that much more meaningful and enjoyable for them and less of an opportunity to check a box.
Yeah.
Kelly, I love what you're saying there, Kelly, because in my mind as a parent, I think about it as an exercise in like pulling on threads of interest,
Mhm.
and then just trusting that the process will evolve from there. If you as a parent can just pull on whatever interest the students have, your teen has, then a lot of the process will take care of itself.
I agree. And I love that you all both had this common theme of going back to like letting your student drive the process, but also not kind of pushing them into this process. You started off really slow, very casually allowing them to their interest to still drive it by making pros and cons lists, or really just introducing them slowly, and their interest got to evolve and grow as it would naturally would, and you got to support them along the way. And so we have a question from the chat, and I think it's a great time to introduce it. The question states, that hi Jen, I'm gonna read the question, but I didn't know if I wanted to read the whole paragraph. Okay. The question is specifically for Kelly, and she's class of 97 grad, and the daughter is currently a sophomore in high school. She's very interested in William and Mary, and I told her all my great memories. I'm worried that with this passage of time, my memories may not be ringing true to what William and Mary is now. Have you recognized any significant differences to the William and Mary now compared to the William and Mary back then?
It's interesting that your daughter is interested because my oldest swore that he was not going to William and Mary. I think that was part of what was driving his interest in a big university in a city. Um, he really wanted to pave his own way. He did not want to follow in our footsteps. So I think yes and no, it has changed. Each of our kids is having a very different experience than we had. They've chosen completely different activities. And I think some of that is their personalities. I think some of that, though, is they're very cognizant of creating their own William and Mary. Um, the things, it depends on what you loved, Jen. The things that I loved about William and Mary were the student body and the community and the engagement with professors. That is all absolutely still a part of the university experience. The traditions are still there. The students are very, very tightly tied to each other. The, typical William and Mary person is still very twampy. Um, it is kind of a community of people that relish the academic and engagement. So I think that part of it is true too. I would suggest to your daughter that she reach out to, if she knows students there now, or even to admissions and do the student shadow days, which become available in the spring, or start reaching out to, faculty members to get a sense of whether it's a match for her in the same way that it was for you.
Yeah. And I know, Fitz, this was a William and Mary phrase question, but do you have anything to add in terms of how the process has changed and also navigating your student or child wanting to go to the same university or even visiting the same university that you went to?
Right. Well, one of the themes that's already starting to develop, and we've all touched on it, is that importance of having the parents step back. And we've talked about it in a variety of ways, but we haven't talked about it within the context of our perspectives are out of date, right? The college admissions process has completely changed, and many colleges have changed a great deal. Now, Kelly pointed out some of the themes that are still in place, the experience that she had at William and Mary and those core components that are still relevant today.
Yeah.
But, part of the benefit of having parents kind of step back a little bit from the process is that they're not bringing these antiquated opinions into the fold about the process or a particular college, because so much has changed, and I don't even want to admit how long it's been since I went through the process. But even a lot has changed since the pandemic.
Yeah.
So
No, I completely agree. So our next question is, did your children attend public or private schools? I'm assuming this is meaning K through 12 education.
So my kids both went to public school in Charlottesville. They were in private middle schools, very small middle schools, and then they transitioned to a big public high school. So they had some experience in kind of a smaller school and what that environment was like. And then their high schools were about 1,200 students.
And my teenagers attend a private school in Richmond, and my son, who's heading to William and Mary, he's very much the kind of kid who loves learning for the sake of learning. And I think that's very much been nurtured by this small school setting that he's in right now. And so that was instrumental to how we thought about the college search process. We wanted to make sure that he could find a place that would feel like a natural step, a place where he could find his people, other folks who want to learn for the sake of learning, not for just chasing a grade. And he wanted to find a place that would feel like a natural step out of a smaller school setting.
I think you made a great point. I actually want to stay here for a second and talk a bit more about this. You just said how it was important that you found a school where your son felt as if he belonged just amongst the people, amongst the community. So, can you both speak a bit more to how you knew that that was William and Mary for both of your children, or all of your children? I know you have two sons.
Want to go ahead, Fitz?
Sure. I mean, to be clear and to reinforce this theme of stepping back,
Mhm.
a lot of it just was me relying on his reactions,
Okay.
right? I, I feel very confident with his choice and I'm thrilled for him. But in a
Mhm.
lot of ways, this was a process that I was very involved in the beginning. And as the process developed, I'm grateful to say that he started taking more and more ownership in the process. And I kind of, this is my very sophisticated image, his level of involvement went like this, while mine went like this.
Mhm.
I had to get us started and get the ball rolling, but as the process unfolded and we got closer and closer to the application season, he was thankfully really running with the process, and he felt like he synced with the William and Mary culture. And so, I
Mhm.
wouldn't even say that I had a heavy hand in that. I mean, of course, I, I shaped what schools we were considering and with my knowledge, but it was up to him.
I
Kelly, do you have
think
anything you want to add? Go
Yeah,
ahead.
I think the time on campus is really key here. For my oldest, who was considering so many different universities, it was the admitted student stays that really allowed him to narrow down where he felt at home. Because you're going to those and you're on the campus with students that would be your classmates in the future. So that was what allowed him to really realized that William and Mary was his people. For the youngest who wanted to apply early decision, he did some campus visits, but not just the campus tours. He actually was able to do shadow days where he would spend a day with a student, going to their classes, going to the cafeterias, talking to professors. And he did that at 3 different universities before he decided to
Mhm.
apply early decision. And I think those opportunities are really much more enlightening. I don't know if you've seen the bingo card yet of campus tours, but they're really, no matter how different the campus and how different the vibe, the campus tour, they all start to run together. They all talk about their library that gets quieter or louder as you go up or down.
Mhm. Yeah.
There are 400 student activities and you can create your own.
Mhm.
So they do give you, some sense of it, but really interacting with the students is what allows the prospective applicant to get a sense of where they're going to feel at home.
Kelly, that's a really good point, and to keep
Mhm.
running with it, I would point out that one way the college search is very different now than 30 plus years ago is that there are a ton of virtual resources, and it's kind of hard to know how to use those virtual resources and when to lean into the personal experiences. And so for us, we very much used virtual resources, virtual information sessions, and tours, and other online, resources to filter out where we would then go visit. And then, we tried to make the most of the campus visits, and then we tried to bring back in various online resources to deepen the engagement with the school. Um, so that of course is incredibly different from at least when I
Yeah.
went through the process. Maybe not you, Faith, but but
Yeah.
that's an important distinction too, and to think about that balancing act. If you did it all in person, you'd get overwhelmed and it'd be crazy expensive to visit that many schools. If you did it all online, then you'd miss out on that personal touch that Kelly was
Yeah.
just describing.
Yeah. I completely agree, and that you're leading us right into our next question, which is, could you speak more about how you leverage resources provided by universities to learn more about the different colleges and also programs and clubs they offer? So Kelly, I'll give you a chance to answer, and then Fitz, if you have anything else you want to add, please feel free.
Sure. I think we've covered a couple of these, the student shadowing, the reaching out to
Mhm,
professors.
mhm,
I don't think there was any university that my students reached out to, even, Big Ten ones, that they didn't hear back in some capacity from those
mhm,
faculty members because, they understand that recruitment is part of their job as well. Um, One thing that we did find really helpful is actually a college board site. I think it's Big Future, and you can search universities in a variety of ways. So at the beginning, when it's completely overwhelming, it allows you to filter by a geographic area. I think you can put how many miles from your home zip code,
mhm,
but then it also has public and private and 2-year and 4-year and different majors. And do they have Greek life and how many students live on campus? And there's just I don't know, 10 or 12 different ways to filter it. And so it just really helps your student to hone in on what types of universities there are, what they might be interested in, which ones they want to visit. I'd never found anything else that was quite as comprehensive as a search tool. So that was really key at the beginning to help them hone into what they might be interested in pursuing.
I don't have a ton to add because I feel like I already talked about the
mhm,
balance of
mhm,
um, virtual activities and
mhm,
in-person activities. But I
yeah,
would add that, in terms of visiting campuses, there's obviously the admissions information session experience, there's the campus tour, and those scripted experiences are really great in a lot of ways. But I found that the unscripted activities were also really helpful. I
mhm.
don't know if I'd call that a resource, Faith, to your question, but it's an
Hey, I
important
would.
part of the process. It's
Yeah.
my son and I took our bikes on the
Mhm,
back of our car to a bunch of campus visits, and so we would just ride our bikes around after the tours or before the tours, and it's amazing how much more you can
mhm,
experience on a campus
yeah.
when you don't just show up for the tour and the information session and then leave immediately.
Mhm. I agree, and I think you both made really great points. I wanna speak to first, Fitz, you talking about the unscripted resources. That's what was one of my favorite experiences as a student is being in Sadler or even within Campus Center when we use Campus Center, and having parents come in, like, just kind of walking away from their campus tours to be like, "Can I ask you the truth? Like, can I ask you questions about your experience, and can you help me navigate this bit more from somebody who is getting the experience in which my student is looking for?" And those moments I feel like are a lot more meaningful and allow you to get a different perspective. And so you can capitalize on those by going to campus during really busy times. I would say homecoming, but homecoming is always such a fun time where nobody is, I don't think, often thinking about admissions. But finding other bigger times around campus and even utilizing the more scripted resources like admission days to come to campus and talk to students who are already there and who are excited about the mission that is that university, and then leveraging that. I also love that you brought up I believe it was Big Future, Kelly. That's a site I really, really, really relied on as a first gen student coming in and learning more about, okay, how far will I be from home? Is this what I want? I think they also have ratio from like student to professor ratio that you can
Mhm.
filter for. And so just really being intentional about some of those resources and navigating them in the process. So we're gonna go back to one of the questions in the chat, and it was our attendee who asked about if your child attended public or private. They were wondering if that would affect them in looking for a college. So could you speak to that any Fits?
Um, I, I guess disproportionately smaller
Um,
schools
mhm,
are private schools.
mhm,
So my son really very much believed that a smaller school setting was the kind of place that he wanted to go to college
mhm,
after looking at some bigger schools. So in a way that skewed our list toward private schools, but obviously he's going to a public university, public college. So it didn't dictate it. But his list did skew towards private schools because there are more of those that are small.
mhm.
Um, I guess that, but
Oh,
we were receptive to all, but
mhm,
all types of schools.
yeah. So can you also speak a little bit, and you both can speak to this, about how you leveraged the resources that you had within the school that you went? So your school went a public
That's
education.
exactly what I was going to say, Faith, about the public versus private is
Yes,
I think
just
typically
speak to that a little
speaking,
more.
your private schools have more resources that you can lean on, and I highly recommend taking advantage of those. The kids that are in most of the public schools have to do a lot more self-advocacy, a lot more of their own organizational tasks. Their college counselors or their counselors as a whole tend to just
Mhm.
be, pretty overworked and very busy with
Yeah.
their caseload. So we found that our students really had to own that process themselves, and really meet quite frequently with their college advisors. We had both of our students kind of put together an activity sheet from the beginning and talk about their goals and objectives in that so that they could share that with their people writing letters of recommendation, because
Mhm.
in the public schools, everybody goes to the same teachers. So it eased the burden on them. And I think probably gave them better letters of recommendation because the teachers had something right at their fingertips that they could use.
Yeah. So speaking to that, we actually have a webinar on college recommendation letters specifically with, and also a parent and alum who's loved about the university, and he gave a really good suggestion of having a form and taking this form to the teacher in which you want your students want a college recommendation letter from, just so they can understand your student or your child from your perspective, and also be really well informed about what they're writing about, and add a bit more nuance to the student they get to learn while they're in the classroom. So I think that's a helpful tip. And also that webinar is available on our website if you want to go and find that, and any other, he had a lot of helpful knowledge. So any other helpful knowledge that he provided to help navigate um, teachers and trying to get recommendation letters, and also just utilizing resources within the school.
Yeah, I think my son at first very much felt like steering or encouraging his recommenders to bring up certain points wasn't his place. He felt, who am I to make a suggestion to my teacher about what to include in the recommendation? And so getting him past that feeling was something that we worked on.
Yeah.
And so, the way that I talked about it is that let's make sure we think about what you want to highlight in your application, and let's ensure that the message that the teachers bring in through their letters of recommendation sync up with what you're
Yeah.
including in your essays and the activities that you've done, and et cetera, et cetera. So it took a little bit of convincing for him to get to that spot where he felt comfortable with whether it was a sheet with a list
Mhm.
of activities or just
Mhm.
the way that he talked to his
Yeah.
recommenders. So I think that was a meaningful moment in the process.
Faith, can I jump in here to pivot a little bit?
Mhm.
So kind of building on that, Fitz, one thing we had our students do early was start to think about almost like a position statement of who they are or who they wanted to be. And it changed from eighth and ninth grade through the college application process. But just kind of a tagline, like if you think of what you put on your LinkedIn profile or at the top of your resume, we wanted them to really think about what's one sentence that could sum you up. Um, and that ended up being a really key activity for them because it allowed them to think about their goals and aspirations and what was important to them. But it also allowed when they went to their recommenders to say, this is who I am. And then when they wrote their essays and did their activity list on Common App, they had a theme that they could focus on. So every essay they wrote, every activity they included, all kind of built up this image of them as this kind of person, this picture.
Mhm.
And it really helped drive the whole process, and it made it a lot simpler because they could really focus on building that image of themselves. And like I said, it
Mhm.
changed a lot. So, that one of my sons really loved soccer. And so he thought that he was going to pursue a career in soccer. That didn't happen, but he spent most of his high school years playing soccer, refereeing soccer, and coaching soccer. So he was able to keep that kind of piece of his tagline, but build it into something different.
Yeah.
Yeah, Kelly, to sync with what you're saying and go back to years ago when I was working in admissions, I would talk about how the application, all the pieces of the application needed to be part of an argument for how a student would fit into the college. And so those recommendation letters of the essays are all these different pieces come together and they, to use your word, as a theme, what's that theme or my expression, what's the argument for how that student would fit into the college? And I think that's a really good paradigm, if you will,
Mhm.
for thinking about the process.
Yeah, I agree. And so, speaking of back in the day, we have one of our questions here in the chat that says, "Back in the day when I applied to colleges, I could attend actual classes on campus while I was visiting. This was a great way to learn about different schools. Is that still an option these days?" So,
In
I'm
our
gonna let oh, Kelly, go ahead. You start.
Yeah, in our experience, it is. Sometimes
Mhm,
it's easier and sometimes it's harder. And it depends on the time of year. I think, at least for my younger son, William and Mary didn't open that opportunity until this, late in the fall of senior
mhm,
year. I think, Faith, you can maybe speak to that a little bit more.
mhm,
But most universities that we looked at had some opportunity to do that. And if they didn't, we often found that either just contacting a professor
mhm,
directly. I think there was one university where my son just found a professor who did research in an area of interest and emailed him directly and said, "Can I come sit in on a class?"
mhm,
But most admissions offices will be able to connect you in some way to a student shadowing opportunity where you can sit in on a class, was at least what we found.
mhm,
In a moment of total candor and authenticity, I would tell you that we wanted to do that. We wanted to attend classes, and due to scheduling issues, we basically came up empty-handed. Now we got to one class, but I mean, you know, it- that really was not something that in our family we could pull off just due to scheduling. Um, Issues. A lot of times we were visiting colleges during. There was one college that we visited that he loved, but we visited during exam season. You get the gist. It just became harder to execute on that. So, in an ideal world, those class experiences I think would be cooked into a great college search, but it's not always as easy as it sounds, I guess, is what I would
yeah.
share.
So I provided a link in the answer to that question just so you William& Mary does have class visits, and you can learn more at that website I provided. It says that they have availability now, but I think it does vary depending on the time of year because exam season is very real at William& Mary, and so allowing professors to adjust as well as admission office professionals to adjust as well. All right, we have another question. Can you talk a bit more on the Common App, especially to the experience for your kids? I've heard that it's much easier now. So kids just apply to a lot of schools. Did your kid have more schools they looked at than perhaps you did? Or did they have a very good idea of the couple of schools or just Women Mary and chose to apply to those?
So the Common App, in our experience, it makes it easier, but
Mhm,
it's not as easy as you would like to think because so many colleges have supplemental essays. And while you could submit an application without answering all of the essays, we really felt like if there's an opportunity to tell the university about yourself, you need to take it. So if you're gonna submit an application, then you should take every optional question and write a response to it. So my oldest had grand plans of, he was going to apply to dozens of schools, and he got into the process. And, to go back to Fitz's comment about schedules, junior and senior year are no joke. So, time is just becomes a critical piece of this puzzle. And that they'll just run out of time and motivation, I think, before they'll fill out all of the applications that they want to. So it does make it easier, but it doesn't streamline it as much as you would hope. And then you've also got the application fee. Those add up. So, limiting some there is also a fiscal choice.
yeah,
We did find that having one place where you would put all of your activities, that made it a lot easier, referring to the back in the day. I remember trying to feed mine into a typewriter and, type my activities on 10 different applications. So having one place where you put all those sorts of things is key. Along those lines, somebody told us, and it was an excellent tip, that you can start your Common App in your junior year. and it
Mhm.
resets on August 1st, but you can move your information over. And we encouraged our students, I think it was the summer before senior year, so they weren't super early, but to get in there and start looking at that, because some of the word and the character counts are really limiting.
Mm.
So if you're in Common App early, you can start to see, I have 10 activities I can include, and I have 85 characters to describe them. And that takes some real effort to thoroughly explain who you are with those limitations. So getting into Common App early really helps a lot too.
Chris, would you have anything you'd like to add there?
I would add that, yes, getting into your Common App in advance of August 1st is great.
Mhm.
And to build on Kelly's comment, the supplements can be very demanding. The extra essays that are distinctive to individual colleges can represent a lot of work. With regard to that pivot from pre-August 1 to post-August 1, leading up to the senior year of high school, I do think it's important to point out that the colleges refresh their
Mm-hmm.
applications after
Yeah.
August 1. So you don't want your student to spend too much time thinking about supplemental essays pre-August 1 because they might have a rude awakening if the college decides to change its supplemental essays when it
Yes, thank you
releases
for
the new
pointing it
version
out,
on
Fitz, because
August
that
1.
that would be
So
a disaster.
yeah,
It's
yeah.
more the generic activities, and I don't
Yeah.
remember some of the other details, but yes.
And while those supplements are tough, I do think it's worth pointing out that there's some themes to them. Explain your academic interests. Why are you interested in college X, etc. There's certain questions that pop up and again as the supplemental
Well, remember,
question.
Fitz, my son's advice was to write as few essays as possible. So identify those themes.
Identify the themes and then do your best
Seriously.
not to include the wrong school's name when you submit it to us.
Yes.
Yeah. Yes.
So you all provided great feedback. And I also want to hop into the second part of this question because I know we've briefly mentioned it, but we haven't talked about it in detail. And Jen asks, would you recommend early decision or early action if your child did that? And I remember you all mentioning that you do have experience there. So could you speak a little more in depth to it? Kelly, you can start.
Okay. Um, so with our first son, we did not encourage early decision because we didn't understand how FAFSA would play out for us. And so we had concerns that if he did early decision and then the aid packages weren't in line with what we could afford, that would be a limiting factor. I think we learned through the process and talking to more people that that's less of an issue than it probably should have been for us. But he also was not leaning strongly towards any particular university. Early action, I would absolutely advise anytime you can meet an early action deadline, there's no commitment there. Get it in, your odds are better, and you're crossing things off the list early. Um, but early decision, since it's binding, that one requires a little bit more thought. Our youngest was sold on William and Mary, knew that's what he wanted, so absolutely do the early decision in that case and save yourself the headaches and find out early.
Yeah,
Thank you.
the possibility of finding out earlier is such a blessing. Um, what a wonderful thing to hear earlier in senior year when there are so many stresses swirling around.
Yeah.
But to echo Kelly's point, you really don't want to apply early decision unless you're completely committed. And we were fortunate in that my son felt that way. Um, and to be clear, he's a teen like all teenagers. He can be pretty wishy-washy. But on this, I could see in him a decisiveness that was reassuring, and so it felt like a great call for us, and it totally transformed the senior year experience.
Yes, yes. The other thing to keep in mind is some universities have rolling admissions.
Yeah.
So we used that as a take the load off early kind of situation. Both of our kids applied in mid-August to somewhere that had rolling admission. So they had a college admissions letter in their pockets by mid-September. And it was just a real sense of relief that they knew they were going to college. I mean, we knew they were going to get in somewhere for sure, but they got that letter early and they knew that they had a university that they could go to the next year. really before school even got off the ground for them senior year. So the rolling admissions is something to keep in mind as well.
I love that point, and to layer onto it, I would just point out that though my son was applying early decision, he submitted a lot of other applications at the same time.
Mhm.
And that was, I thought, critical, especially in the event that the news had been bad. It would be great to have, to have other applications already submitted and positive decisions like your boys had, Kelly.
Right.
Um,
Okay, we're on our final question because I want to be cognizant of everybody's time, and I also want to give you all enough time to answer this question and really leave our participants with something. And our final question is, what would you like to leave parents with as they navigate this process? Fitz, I'll let you start.
okay, great. Um, I don't mean to repeat myself, but instead I just want to highlight the importance of letting the process evolve naturally. I had so many ideas heading into this process. I thought I knew certain things about how it would shake out. Um, and I was constantly surprised, not only by my reactions to colleges and the process, but also by my son's and by being mindful of how his interests were changing and our reactions to these colleges and these experiences were different from what I expected, from what we expected. I think by allowing it to be more fluid, more organic, we allowed it to work out better. So I guess my parting um, advice would be to encourage parents to leave some of those notions at the door, to ditch some of those impressions that you probably already have. If you're just getting started, head into it as open-minded as possible and allow your teen's experience to go in lots of different directions because that'll help them end up landing on a more confident decision.
And Kelly, what would you like to leave parents with today?
Sure. I think it's a little bit of a mindset too. So many people come into college admissions with it's this awful experience that we've got to suffer through with our student. I really found it to be a really positive and exciting experience. It's a really unique opportunity for self-reflection for them and growth and consideration of what they want to do with their future, which is a little bit overwhelming. But it's also just it's such a cool opportunity. There's so many great universities out there now with so many great programs. So I think just reframing the mindset, both for yourself and for them, that this is an exciting time for you. And it's a real opportunity to reflect on who you are and who you want to be and what you want to happen next. And it really changes the whole dynamic then in your family about the whole process because it's less of a headache and less of a chore and more of this opportunity for exploration.
I could not agree with you any more on that. And I'll even boil it down to something funny. And that is that s- several of my favorite conversations in recent years have been the conversations with my teens as we drove away from a campus. Just listening to them and trying to encourage them to reflect. When they're in the car and they can't bail out on the conversation, and they open up and they share their thoughts and experiences. It's pretty neat. It's pretty neat. And that reflection that you're describing, Kelly, is just if it's encouraged, I think it's a pretty powerful part of the process.
Well, I just want to take a moment as we wrap up to thank you both so much for your insights today and your participation and your expertise on helping give parents something to walk away with as they continue to navigate this college application process with their students. I also want to thank everybody for joining us today and be sure to be on the lookout for emails regarding upcoming webinars. We won't have any more this semester, but we will definitely be starting back up in the fall. And the lack of webinars will gladly be compensated by our initiatives of note writing parties. We're bringing them in region now. So usually our note writing campaign is something that happens to welcome and not admitted, but accept, yeah, admitted students, there we go, into the university by having alumni write them letters and we then mail them out to them. And so this year we're going in region to bring some of the exciting note writing festivities to you all. So please be on the lookout for more emails and information regarding that. And I will happily share a link to our past webinars that I've referenced here for you to learn more as you see fit. If you all don't have anything else to add, I will go ahead and close the session out for today.
Good luck to everyone.
Thanks.
You all have a great evening. Let me send you this link. And let me stop recording.